All right. Hello again. Welcome tonight. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. Let's get into it. So, this is my little ruffle prep, and I absolutely shortened the length of my ruffle because I'm a short person. So, I made mine 6 inches deep, which is not quite half the width as it is drafted. So it's a little bit more than half, but so I took off like 4 inches in length, I think, because I'm short and I just need a little less ruffle. Also, I have very short legs. Most of my height is in my torso. Um, and then in order to pep this up, I thought about a lot of different options for how to decorate my ruffle, but I decided to keep on theme with what I did for the corset, and I put those lovely little faux gussets in that have the sort of trans-inclusive uh, little stripes on them. And so I decided to do the same treatment on the bottom of the ruffle. And I do that by creating bias strips out of the colors and then stacking them. So I still have to put the pink on. So we're going to do our little pink bit together and finish this up. And then we're going to gather it. I may pull out my ruffling foot to do that portion of the event, and talk a little bit about that. Now, the thing I do that is kind of lazy and a little bit extra at the same time is that she has you cut 3 lengths that are I don't know, 25 inches long or something like that. But
21
rather,
inches.
21. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I
But
am
mine only has one seam in it.
Mine also only has one seam in it because I just cut 2 lengths across the width of my fabric because it was 45-inch wide fabric, which means it's like 42 inches wide. And that's just roughly two of those three pieces. It's just easier to have only one seam. So that's what I did. And currently it's the full 2 pieces. Now, if I decide that that's a little bit too much ruffle, I can trim it off as I go. But sometimes I do an extra ruffle at the bottom here. So here's the thing. If you are concerned about being historically accurate or being more historical in your approach to ruffles, usually in the 19th century, their ruffles were sort of like 1.25 to 1.5 times the length of whatever they were ruffling it into. So they didn't want their ruffles typically to be too full, not too 1980s, I guess. But I'm an 80s girl. And I'm a time traveler, and sometimes I want a lot of ruffle. And this is a bustle cage. So I'm just like, whatever. I'm going to let my vibes guide me. But also, I love to only cut twice and not cut 3 times. That's nice. So, just so you know, I'm using that word a lot. This is a little bit longer than drafted and a little bit shorter than drafted. And so I have altered this. The other thing I did was, you know, it's been serged along this raw edge in preparation so that this fabric won't fray or anything underneath my bustle. This seam where the ruff attaches is kind of open to the world. So if somebody's inspecting your bustle cage, they will see the seam allowances of this particular seam. Um, yeah, and so Alicia makes a good point. The ruffle needs to match the volume of the bustle, so it's kind of an individual choice. And if you're like somebody who wants more volume in your bustle, you may want more ruffle. But also you can be as extra as you want to be in your ruffle. So those are some changes. Now, it's important that you put your ruffle on first because the wings capture part of this top edge of the ruffle, and they also capture that bottom boning channel to help support it and force it into that curved shape. So you want to have this prepped and ready to go before you put the wings and the inner back piece in place. So she's really clear in the instructions. She tells you to add the ruffle first. It's just that in my head, I forgot that happened. So fortunately, I reviewed the pattern before teaching today, which is a very responsible thing to do and something I should do every time. And sometimes I do it every time. Right, so we're going to go in first. We're going to add our pink stripe. We're going to finish that off and finish prepping this guy. And like I said, I made all of this bias tape in the colors of my stripes. And I essentially just stack them so that the raw edges line up. And then it folds over. And I buried the next raw edge in the next stripe up until the last stripe where I am going to tuck that raw edge under and top stitch. So it's a pretty quick and easy method of doing this, except that you have to prep a lot of bias tape. And I was afraid I would run out of bias tape again because that's the story of this project. This is also a great example of how I freewheel without using any kind of pins or adhesive or anything. I'm just going to place this fabric on top of the other fabric and stitch it without any kind of device to hold it in place. Okay. Let's
I
take
was
a
about
look.
to say, I was about to say you're a loose hussy, but really it's the bias tape that's a loose hussy because it's loose.
It is the it is loose. It's loose and on the prowl for more fun things to do is bias tape. So ridiculous. All right. Look at this bias tape hussy. Okay. All right. So, I know that I have drafted in a half seam allowance for all of these. And so basically, what I'm doing is I'm lining the edge up here with my 1/2 inch mark on the plate underneath my presser foot. And then I get a good sense of what the space is between the edge of my presser foot and the edge of my fabric. And I do my best to eyeball that as I go. And also to not get tangled in my own fabric around my presser foot. And as usual, I'm doing a 2.5 millimeter stitch, and all of my, I'm using a normal all-purpose thread. I am going to give myself a little back tack. And as I go, I just try and keep an eye on this to make sure I'm staying pretty even. And I keep my raw edges here lined up as I go. That said, it just needs to be visually close enough because it is getting ruffled. It is going to be a little deceptive, and the human eye is pretty good at like picking out what looks visually symmetrical but doesn't need like calipers. So as you can see, the cotton kind of just stays stacked together. It's a little bit the friction of the fabric because it's not slick will sort of stick together. The big challenge here is that it gets a bit hung up on the floor as I'm pulling it up into the sewing machine. This is more of that Kona cotton. It's the same cotton I use for creating the rainbow bustle. And it's the same cotton I've used in the rest of, did I say bustle rainbow corset? And so that's helping me keep all of my colors roughly the same across the garments. So they have a lot of, they just blend really beautifully and they look like a match set. You can also see as we're going along places where I didn't quite get my bias sewn together perfectly, but that is okay because it will be hidden in the seam allowance. I'm sure there are other ways to approach this, but I like the bias. It wants to go on a little bit more smoothly as a stripe of fabric. And so it gives a really nice appearance as I'm going. Give myself a little back tack there. And that's fun. I ran out of bobbin threads with about an inch to go on my seam. So we're just gonna live this life because that will get lost in the seam allowance. Well, ridiculous. All right, so now we have to go press it and prep it for finishing. But you can see it gives me a really nice stripe when I do this. And it's like, if you know your LGBTQ flags, this is a sort of classic element at this point. So it really reads as the pride flag, which was important to me because I'm doing this whole like vibe, this whole theme with this project. So we're going to go over to the ironing board, do some ironing, and look at some grading of seams. I don't always grade my seams, but I find that when I remember to do that, I'm very happy that I did. And it does make a difference when you're dealing with something that's going to be kind of bulky. Because of the way I stack these strips of bias together, it has the possibility of being fairly bulky. And I don't mind a little bit of like little hump of thickness there, but I don't want it to be so thick that it's really stiff. So I appreciate that this finish is giving a little bit of body to the edge of my ruffle, and it will certainly like add to the weight of this ruffle to help pull the bustle cage into position, because you know, this wonderful cotton has some body to it, but it's not like a super heavy fabric. So when I put this extra trim on the edge of the ruffle, it really helps to ensure I have the equivalent of a weighted edge, which is nice for that whole experience. And thank you, Cindy. I'm glad that my seams get an A plus. That's wonderful. So, right, let's go over to the ironing board, shall we? I think I mentioned this somewhat regularly, but as many of us have some experience of sewing, we all know that your iron and pressing becomes a huge part of making your garments look nice. And sometimes I feel like I spend way more time at the ironing board pressing things than I do in front of the sewing machine actually stitching stuff. And occasionally I just get very antsy. I want to get to the sewing. I want to make the garment. But a good press will make such a difference in the caliber of the garment. So I'm using a nice steamy iron set for cotton because I'm working all with cotton, and it really loves the steam. This is my secret weapon for filling up my iron with water. I probably should, but I don't use distilled water in my workshop for my iron. The reason why I probably should is because I live in a place with very heavy water. Okay, my cats are having a tiff behind us. So I live in a place with very heavy water. It has a lot of minerals in it, and so the minerals will really build up and ultimately shorten the lifespan of my iron. But I find that the sheer extent of usage and the amount that I have it on will tend to wear it out before the heavy water does. So, yeah, I don't. Yes.
My iron instructions say specifically not to use distilled water, to use tap water. But like you, our water comes from a well that goes down through granite 1,000 feet. So all that water has soaked through granite for 1,000 feet. So I do a mix of distilled and tap in it.
Oh, nice, nice to sort of cut down on some of the minerality.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you'll get a buildup. And I know you can do some stuff with vinegar to try and like clean it out, but sometimes the vinegar will have a bad effect with the metal parts of your iron. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm pressing open my seam where I joined the pink to the blue. I'm pressing it flat. And I heard recently that it's really technically ironing and not pressing if you're moving your iron. And pressing is when you press your iron. And I had never really made that distinction before. So good to learn things. I also learned from the same source that if your fabric does not already have some sort of stay stitching in it, when you move it along like that, you can sometimes inadvertently stretch your fabric. So it's good to know. This is all stitched in place though, so I'm not really worried about stretching currently. I do, however, really want to get a nice crisp seam there because it will make my stripes look better. And if I were like really persnickety, I would have marked in all these seam allowances so that I could sew everything exactly at a 1/2 inch and had everything really pristine. And there are times when I will absolutely do that when I feel like the effort pays off in the visual finish. But a lot of times I just rely on the tools of my sewing machine to help me make sure that everything is lined up roughly symmetrically. So once I press it from the top, I also give it a press from the bottom. To reinforce that seam. The wonderful wool pressing mat is really absolutely helping with setting these seams. And once I've pressed it, I'm going to go in and grade that seam allowance as I talked about on when we were over at the sewing machine. I'm grading away the under sort of the bit of fabric that's underneath. So not the top one. And I love these little applique scissors, these duckbill scissors. I just go in, I'm cutting it in half essentially. So from a 1/2 inch down to a 1/4. I'm just going to go the whole tedious length and do this thing that no one will see, but I will know I did it. You all will know I did it. And anyone who decides to feel up my ruffle will know that I graded those seams. So most people will never know, however. I don't have a lot of people who are like, let me feel your ruffles. That's not a regular occurrence in my life.
But people will know
That's
that
sort
you
of
did
like,
it by not seeing it.
oh, there you go. Thank you, Martha. It's like the grading is preventing the panty lines of sewing. So as I go through here, sometimes I do this with like my regular size shears, but I would really hate to accidentally snip the base fabric of this ruffle. So I am taking extra care by using my little applique scissors. The regular shears would go faster though. And they, you know, in part because they give you a longer cut as you're working.
That just gives you a higher probability of cutting something you don't want to cut.
That's correct. It's
The whole point of the
dangerous.
duckbill.
It's dangerous. So we are being careful. I've put a lot of work into this ruffle already, so I kind of don't want to like snip it by accident and like undo my work. Sometimes you can come back from that, but better safe than sorry, right? Do do do. Do do do. Keeps going. I did make my life a little bit more tedious by making my ruffle really long, but you know, honestly, ask me what I hate doing more. Trimming fabric or cutting out pattern pieces? And the answer is I hate cutting out pattern pieces way more than any other step of the sewing process. So anytime I can shave off some effort and time with cutting pattern pieces, I tend to do that. All right, so now I've trimmed this down. We're gonna press again. This time I'm gonna press it flat and with the right side up. On this one, as I get it pressed into place, I'm actually going to go in with my seam stick and reinforce that because I really want that press to be nice and smooth and firm and even because this is the money shot, as it were. To use a terrible analogy, but it's the one that shows, so it's the one that counts. Let's see here. No accidental snipping, says Martha. Yes. Yeah, and feel up my ruffles is definitely like a new euphemism. It might make its way onto swag. Who knows? So once I've let that sit for a moment, I go into the next section and I give it another nice steamy press. And I put my seam stick right on top of that. Again, between the seam stick and the wool pressing mat, I get a really crisp edge on my pressing, which is lovely. And honestly, I didn't have a seam stick for a long time. I didn't have a wool pressing mat until like 2021 or 22. So I did without these things for a long time, and I would still get really solid results from a normal ironing board and iron situation. But I do notice a level of crispness that is definitely sharper than my pressing before. It's fussy and not like incredibly obvious, but once you know and once you've worked with these tools, it's so nice. It makes enough of a difference that I feel very invested in my seam stick and my wonderful wool pressing mat, and I am happy to extol their virtues. So there are lots of ways to attach a ruffle, and that's going to be our next step. We're going to talk through some of the ways and decide which method I'm going to use. You can use some feet like a gathering foot or a ruffling foot that will do a lot of the labor for you. And those things work out really nicely when you have a smooth fabric that doesn't have any, texture or nap to it. But if you have anything with texture, those tools will not really work for you. You can always run your 2 lines of gathering stitches at the top of your ruffle and go with that method. Very classic. You can also divide and conquer, which is a wonderful, like a little bit of a quick and easy method. It works especially great for certain kinds of pleating, but it's going to be brilliant for this kind of ruffle as well. And you can also actually just pleat your ruffle in. If you prefer a smoother edge, you do not have to ruffle this. You can do a pleated ruffle instead. It's more tailored look. I've certainly done that before on my bustle cages. I go back to the actual ruffle pretty often because it's so effective at breaking up the sharp line of my petticoat and bustle cage under my skirts. And I really appreciate the ways in which I obscure the sharp line of the metal bones and sort of hide what's happening under my skirts. Let's see here. We've got some more fun comments. Ruffle checkers and pleat checkers in the same branch. Well, pleat checkers is a higher training, says Alicia. This is great. Yeah, well, there's the ruffle constabulary. So I'm sure they have a lot of branches to investigate your ruffles and pleats as they are related. They are governed by the same board of people. Okay, so now that I've got this pressed in place, we want to turn this top edge under and get that pressed in place. You can go in with your wonderful little ruler if you want to make sure to have a very even press and just like line it up with your ruler like so and press and then turn. This is going to be the most uniform option. You can also just use your seam allowance here and press this one right over to meet that seam allowance, and you will get pretty close to even all the way along. And then you can come in with your iron and hit that with some steam and your seam stick. So then I just finish it up with a little top stitching. Of course, this is where you get to ask yourself, am I going to top stitch with my fancy pants rainbow thread and torment myself? Or am I going to top stitch with a light pink thread that disappears into my beautiful stripe? And as always with top stitching, I feel like the real deal is pick the one that works best for your project. Have fun with it. You're having to do the labor as it is. And don't be afraid of a little contrast. So you can see I'm using the cheater method and not measuring. I'm just tucking and feeling that seam allowance underneath.
You're not doing the total cheater method, because at this point I would just go back to the machine and stitch it and then come back and press it. So
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm at
mean,
least pressing.
yeah, you're pressing first. I would press after I stitched because
You know, the big thing is I'm here at the ironing board already, so it's sort
yeah.
of like it's easy enough to just go ahead and press since I'm over here. But I have definitely, if I haven't come over and pressed the other ones, I have definitely just been like, okay, well, we're just finger pressing and stitching, and then we'll go and give it a nice steamy press once it's all in place.
Yeah. Less burned fingers that way too.
That also. One thing I'm sort of wishing I had done for myself before I came over here is grab my little silicone fingertips. Those wonderful silicone finger cots actually really help with projects like this, where you're getting your fingers right onto that hot fabric or really near the iron as you're working. It actually does save me a lot of singeing. But I also have a lifetime of singeing my fingertips at the iron, so I'm a little bit inured to the suffering, I guess. I think we all sort of either deaden the sensation in our fingers or we get used to a little bit of scorching as part of the process. All right, my darlings, let's go over to the sewing machine. And we can all dream of more caftans. I'm wearing one tonight. I love a caftan. It's getting into serious caftan weather here as it warms up.
Yeah, I finally got up into the upper 70s here.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
So for your gathering, have you ever zigzagged over a cord or a heavy upholstery thread to
yes.
pull it up? So I find
That's
it so much easier than the two lines of stitches and then the stitches break and you're
Oh, yeah. Honestly, maybe we'll do that one because that's a great question. And I have. Usually I use a
especially since you're doing so much.
I'm
Yeah.
doing so much. Yeah, it might be easier to do the cord. So for those who've not ever done that, like you want a heavy duty cord, so even the top stitching cord would work pretty well. Upholstery thread, or you can use dental floss for minty fresh ruffles. So, but you just want something that's like a little bit heavy duty and that you can pull. And we're gonna do that method. What a great question,
Oh,
Cindy's right, because that's magic.
I was hoping to see one of the feet. I've
Oh,
never seen how the feet work.
oh,
They're, whatever is decided by the group.
well, let me just do. I talked a big game, and now I just have to let me get out my ruffling foot.
You need to do a
Wait for you.
sample of the 4 different methods.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
yes.
I mean, in a perfect world, I would do a sample of the 4 different methods, to be honest. And maybe I'll post a picture of all 4 methods or a short video of each. But this is my honkin' ruffler. And honestly, the local Janome shop was going out of business in 2019. And so I bought this for 75% off, which is how I could convince myself to buy one because they're very spendy, but they also are kind of amazing. So, yeah, we can give this guy a try. I don't use him nearly enough, so it might be fun to put him through his paces. And this is my Janome official ruffler that I keep in the packaging because that is how I roll. Yeah. But first, top stitching. And I do not think I recommend using the top stitching thread in the ruffler, by the way. So the ruffler does this cool little thing that's like a miniature pleat. And so there are all these tiny pleats, but you can also, there are lots of adjustments in this little guy, and we'll talk about some of those as we are giving it a whirl. So in order to do the top stitching, I need to pull out my top stitching needle with the big eye and swap it out. I also need to change my tension and drop my needle somewhere. That's fine. I tell you guys, I'm definitely having a case of the dropsy and extra chaotic today. So thank you for your patience.
So what weights of fabric does the ruffler foot work well with?
I do not like it at all with a heavyweight fabric. It needs to be like medium to light, but if you do anything too light, it also will like eat that up. So I would not throw a georgette through this or a chiffon or, you know, an organza. Or if I was going to do any of those, I would do a double layer. I will tell you straight up, it will chew, or at least mine will chew through any kind of net or tulle. So that's also not a good option. But a nice cotton like this, that's sort of you know, not it's not super light. It's not like the shears, but it's still on the lighter end of things, works really beautifully. And I've gone up to something that's more like a light twill before, and it's done well with that. But I wouldn't do like a canvas or you know, denim or anything like that that's heavier duty. That's a great question though, because with the ruffler, you have to think about your weight and your texture and all of those things, because it's pushing the fabric through the foot. And if it's going to catch on the fabric or be too thick to go through the mechanism, you are not going to be happy with your results. Okay. There we go.
I had a really old ruffler at one point, and it had like zigzag teeth on the piece that pushed the fabric in.
Wow.
It's not like that anymore, is it? Or you're
So this is what it looks like. There aren't any like zigzag or sharp. Oh no, there is this. Well, it's
yeah, the
very
piece that
hard to.
moves in and out.
Yeah, they do have a little. They have a little serrated zigzag look to them. They're really. I don't know that I can. They're so small and they're underneath this other piece, so I don't know if you can see them. But yes, it has like little alligator teeth on the edge that pushes the fabric. So that's what's going to chew up your shears and your really fragile fabrics. Like I would try a voile before I put it through here on the final piece. I would check to make sure that even voile wasn't too light. It's kind of one of those Goldilocks tools. Everything has to be just right. But if everything is just right, it works beautifully. Okay. All right, so I'm set up now, I hope, for the top stitching. We've looked at some of this top stitching before. It's the same idea. You want to make sure your stitch length's a little longer than normal. You want to change your tension. You may have to experiment a couple of times to make sure you get the right tension. You'll know that your tension isn't right with the top stitching thread because either the thread from the bottom will come up and like be visible in that top stitch, or you will see that your your stitch is not quite going and making an even length and not quite going all the way through. So at that point, it's usually a question of decreasing the tension on your top thread to make it work, because your top stitch thread is a little thicker. But there's a bit of like, holding your mouth the wrong way, saying some magic incantations and hoping the sartorial gods approve of your project. Okay. I love this caftan, but it is catching on the arms of my chair something fierce. Okay. There we go. So I like to sort of fold up my ruffle into my lap when I'm like adding a trim or anything like that. So it's not all the way on the floor and it's kind of pulling out of my lap. Sometimes I'll do things like this. Sometimes I'll add ribbon or a little bit. Rick rack is actually totally underrated. I love a rick rack sometimes. I've dropped my needle. I'm not as worried about back tacking at this point because I know this is going to go into a little hem on the side. And as usual, I've just found a point on my presser foot that I'm using as my visual guide for where my stitches need to line up. And hopefully I don't sew off the edge of my fabric, but if I do, I just adjust back on. I'm getting kind of as close to the edge as I can. But honestly, I find if you're in like the 1/8 to 16th of an inch from the edge, it's very nice looking. It doesn't require pins. I didn't use adhesive. I just pressed it into place and you can see it plays very nicely under my foot. But it does require me to pay really close attention to my stitching so that I'm not, zigzagging all over the place. I try not to do this kind of sewing when I'm really tired. I definitely unleashed my super fast stitching. We don't need to go that fast. Okay. So now I've got this beautiful little top stitch, very rainbow, keeping in the theme of the rest of the garment, adding another pop of color to the whole thing. And now it's time to swap this out for our ruffler foot and to make sure we've got the proper needle in there and all of those things. So this is a size 12 all-purpose needle. And let's see here. I always have to remind myself how everything goes on. Okay, yes. So this is the attachment that my sewing machine uses for most of the feet. Janome is really fun because they have this kind of snap that they use for all of their official feet. And it makes swapping out those feet easier. With your ruffler, it's got like this little guy here. It needs to kind of hook on to the screw on the side of my machine so that when the machine stitches, it moves this arm up and down. So, like so. You can see how the whole thing moves up and down like that. There is a big storm rolling in outside. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's very loud. So sometimes I thread my needle before I put the ruffler on. You can see why. It's a little bit trickier to thread when the ruffler's in place. So I'm actually gonna take this guy off so I can thread my needle a little easier. And it should snap right in place. If you have a Janome, this system usually works a treat. My ruffler also has a little ability to reposition it. So you can go right or you can go a little bit left. You want to make sure that your needle is not hitting the metal plate. And so I usually do a test. And if it's not right, I shift it. It's still like hitting that metal plate. So let's try this again. There's a tiny little hole that you are shooting for, and you really want to make sure that you are in the zone. Once that's in place, this guy allows you to shift the tightness of your stitches. I usually do a very tight stitch when I'm doing this because I want a nice tight ruffle. Now, hopefully, I remember everything about using it because I haven't used it in a little while. So we've got it attached. I think I'm happy with the depth. You can also adjust the depth of your pleat by shifting this little screw here. You make it more shallow or deeper. Lots of little adjustments. And just sort of slide this in. Maybe.
How do you know what adjustments to make? Okay, so is there a mathematical formula when you've got so much length that you have to fit into so much space?
Yes. So I have a lot of people will actually do a test of their fabric to see what the depth is. So they'll take a little scrap of fabric and see if I've got something, a little scrap, take a little scrap and you just you can test. Although I've weighted it in the wrong way. Okay. Take a little fabric and you're going to do a test. And then you measure the amount of fabric you gathered by the end length. And maybe your needle jams, which is a good thing to discover before you get going too. Oh my goodness, you guys. Ooh, what a jam too. Holy cats. Well, I like when we can have lots of teachable moments together. So good. So
What
this
you're
is
really
fun.
demonstrating here is how fussy it is to get it set up and perfectly and get started.
It's true. I mean, that is one of the challenges with using one of these is that they can be really fussy. There we go. Once you get going, though, it is like it will be very nice. So those stitches came out because I had my little technical difficulty. But if you are like, I really need to make sure I get exactly the right amount in, you do your test. You measure how compact it gets by how much you started with. And you're like, well, that's too compact. I don't want it that compact. You go over a bit, check and make sure that you're not going to break your needle. Make sure everything's nice and tight. And I'm just sort of like, you kind of angle it in. You want it to get under those teeth so they will feed the fabric in for you and make your little pleat. There we go. Drop your presser foot. You can, if you get good at using one of these, and I don't use mine enough to consider myself really adept, you can actually pleat and stitch to the fabric you're gathering it to at the same time. You can put the other fabric underneath this. But really, I'm comfortable, but I'm not adept. Okay, so this is like half width. Oh, and my needle fell out. Oh my gosh, you guys. We're gonna have every possible problem happen tonight. Wow, I tell you.
Now you
So
have to take the foot off again.
I do. I have to take the foot off again and replace the needle. Wow. Well,
You can go to another method if you want.
at this point, I might do that. But I'm glad we could have this moment. I was looking at the ruffler foot. So, hold on here.
No
What a
other
mess.
method will be this amusing.
No, that's true. But you can see, so then I did like half again the amount of ruffle as the first time, and it gives me sort of this nice little pleated effect, Joanne,
Yeah,
that
I
looks
see.
like that, which is also very nice. But then you're going to test and see, all right, well, how much of my fabric does that eat up? You also can adjust the depth of the pleat you're making. And there's like a little gauge here on this side that tells you like how deep you're making your pleats. So I tend to roll with really deep pleats because I usually am doing a more involved gather. And I want to take up more fabric. And I usually do like a little bit, I'm getting this thicker. But you have lots of settings to play with to see what works and what combo of depth to pleat ratio works well for you. So, my goodness, we're going to take a moment, or I'm going to take a moment anyway.
You
After
might need some
having,
tea.
I need some tea. Really, the ruffler decided to thwart me in every possible way today. And I'm just like, well, thanks, ruffler. That was not what I wanted.
This is an example of why you should always do a sample before you get going.
Oh my gosh. You're not wrong, Cindy. It's just that I am queen of not doing samples before I get going. Partly because that is actually a very bad habit that I have. And also, often I'm like, well, we'll figure it out as we go together so we can talk about it and why I'm choosing something, why this thing works and this doesn't. So, my little ruffler has a sort of rough guide on how to use it on the back, but also I find that if you are getting a ruffler for your machine, again, I recommend getting the name brand that is made by the manufacturer for your machine so that it is engineered exactly to match with your machine's dimensions. Because if you get one that's even a little bit off, it will upset the timing. It could require your machine to go in for a service, depending on how janky it is. But also typically they will have some like good video guides for using this on your machine, because the machine companies know that these are a little fussier to use and that they take some getting used to. They have a bit of a learning curve. And I haven't used mine for a while, so I'm like, right, this is how it goes. So anyway, I'm glad we could have that moment. Joanne, thank you for asking.
So I went through my drawers and I found I do have a ruffler foot. I also have something that looks much simpler, a gathering foot.
A gathering foot.
I am going to have to try both of them. As you can see from the staples, I have never used either of them.
I mean, listen, they're both great. So, I find a gathering foot actually has a little bit less of a learning curve to it than the ruffling foot. So hold on. Well, I have a couple of gathering feet. So let's talk about those a bit. So this is a generic gathering foot. that comes from like Madame Sew or something like that. You can see it's got this little like hump here. That is the mechanism that sort of gathers your fabric. And this one has a little slot. So like the ruffler foot, you can actually add your fabric that's going to be flat and have your fabric that's going to gather to it and sew them in one go. Frankly, I am never that confident with my gathering foot to do that. I usually gather and then stitch it to my fabric that's not getting gathered. Maybe if I used it more. This is the one that came, that was made by Janome to go with my Janome machine. It snaps in place to my machine, which I really like because it has this snap foot system, but it still has this little ridge at the front. The other thing is that, unlike your typical foot, the heel of the foot does not sit on your fabric. It sits a little bit up to create this kind of seesaw effect on your fabric. It also does not like fabric with a lot of texture and nap. So I wouldn't use this for, let's say, your corduroy or your velvet or even silk dupioni. I find that the slubs can be too much and it gets kind of caught up on it. But for something like this cotton or a nice satin, it will work a treat. It also, unlike the ruffler foot, you can use this with some lighter weight fabrics like organza, like your cotton foils, and it's not going to chew them up. It it can be a mixed bag with tulle. Sometimes it works really well with tulle. It could be that just my Janome doesn't like tulle with this foot. And if you've got a Bernina or a Juki or something like that, you're going to have a different experience. But I like my gathering foot, especially if I'm doing something very simple.
It looks
like
like
this.
It looks like it doesn't have a lot of adjustments, so it only gathers one gathering. You can't make it a tighter gather.
I'm going to show you how I use this one.
Okay.
So, and it's going to be less stressful than the ruffler foot. So remember how Cindy was like, you should really do demos of all of the methods? Maybe we will tonight, depending on how this keeps going. So you want to adjust your tension just like you would if you were doing a gathering setup with the 2 rows of thread. And so you're going to tighten up your tension on the top. Now, the tighter your tension, the tighter your gathers. So that is one way you can adjust with the gathering. And then there is a trick with how you run your fabric through your machine. You also want your longest stitch length for this, and patience, and have a seam ripper handy just in case. I will tell you, mine doesn't typically like to go over any sort of like seams, and so I usually like run up to the seam and then hop over the seam and start again, which will work fine with this because it only has the one seam. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. After all of my big talk, let's take a look at this. Okay. I'm glad that you guys asked about the feet though, because if I don't know, I won't always demo this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to drop my needle. Now, here's the trick. I have my offhand and it's going to live behind my fabric a little bit. I'm setting this up. Actually, I'm going to set this up at 3/8 inch rather than a 1/2 inch so that my gathering stitches ostensibly can be hidden in the seam allowance if I need them to be. So I'm going to run a couple of stitches, get my fabric pushed out from behind my gathering foot, and then I'm going to start holding the fabric behind my foot forcing it to gather kind of more tightly. And that helps adjust the tightness of my gathers. You see that gathering is starting to take shape. It won't necessarily be as tight as I could do if I was pulling stitches or doing the thread under the zigzag, as Cindy and I were discussing earlier. And it may not be as tight necessarily as the ruffler foot, but also it's more of a gather than a pleat. And the ruffler foot actually does like a miniature pleat. So all of these methods have their strengths, and they all have sort of an effect of how they look. And so I think it's important to kind of check them all out because they can do different things for you and like save time. I will say this, with the gathering foot, you do not run 2 rows of stitches. In fact, it will punish you if you try and run 2 rows of stitches. It is a single row of stitch situation. Sometimes your fabric will try and like run away with itself and get tangled up under the foot. So you have to pay attention to what your fabric is doing. You can see I had a little place where my fabric has decided to get caught up. Let's see if I can get it back on track. There we go. And I just hold my finger back there until I get a good amount of fabric gathered. The more I can hold, the tighter the gathering is. My dominant hand is sort of directing the fabric in front of the gather, although I'm definitely using this thumb a little bit like a rudder. My index finger is basically just hanging out back here, though. See, I wasn't paying attention. My fabric got off kilter. So it's important to like try and hold on to this fabric. Coming up to my seam. So this is where I am going to like hop over because you can see it doesn't really want to gather that seam allowance. So I pull out a nice tail. I'm gonna hop over, past the seam allowance, past the seam, drop my needle, and start. If you're going to do something like this with the gathering foot, I do actually encourage you to cut down your seam allowance and sort of like grade it so you can get closer to the seam. Some gathering feet are probably going to handle that better than others. I have used the generic one. It works pretty well, but it does not actually work as nicely on my machine as the one made by Janome for Janome machines. When I got my original Janome, the gathering foot was just one of the feet they included with the machine, which was really nice. I'd say this is probably giving me about 1.5, a sort of ratio of like 1.5 to 1 on the gather. So it's not a super tight gather, but it's a very attractive gather. And there we go. The more comfortable you are with it, the faster it goes, of course. I didn't go super slow, but I went kind of medium speed on doing that. And this is what my little gather looks like. Isn't that nice? The gathering foot actually does a really nice job with something like this. The ruffler would have done great as well if I could have gotten it to work, but sometimes less is more, especially when it's fighting you as much as that was today. But I think it looks really very nice. And you can see the way in which this reinforced edge is giving me a lot of nice like body here at the bottom edge. It's almost like doing a corded edge on your petticoats. So it'll be nice and like kind of really support the petticoat and the skirts over my bustle cage. So a nice little feature. So now we've got our gather in place, and we've got this like little patch here in the center where I have no gathers. I will really just manually go in and like force some gathers there. It's about 1.5 inches long, so I'm not worried about manually like pleating in some little gathers there. If I'd been planning to do this initially, I probably would have cut down my seam allowance. I just sewed this together selvage to selvage. Some people frown on that, but honest to goodness, if it was good enough for Charles Worth, it's good enough for me. So I will use my selvages and my seam allowances all the time. And that is like a habit I have that not everybody thinks is a nice way to do things. So just be advised. You should choose what works for you as usual. So any questions before we go on to attaching this to our bustle body or back of our bustle?
I have a general trim question. I could ask it now or
Yes,
I could ask it later.
now is a good time. I'll drink some tea.
Okay. So I ordered flat lace to put on mine.
Mm, mm.
Um, and I don't think I could use my ruffler foot on it because I haven't gotten it yet, but it's gonna have that texture on there, so it won't be super
Yeah, yeah,
flat.
yeah.
Um, uh, do you think that just like hand pleating it would be okay? Just like put a little pleat in every once in a while, or should it be
Yeah,
like,
you,
you know,
so are you
really
planning to put
method?
the lace at the top of your ruffle or the bottom edge of your ruffle?
Yes. No, not at the
Oh,
very top. So, um, at the yeah, I guess it would be at the very top. I was gonna put it at the very top, but not ruffled. Like
okay.
hanging off of the. On your example, I guess. Let me look at. Is the yellow the bottom of your bustle?
So the
Yeah,
purple is the bottom of my
okay.
bustle.
Yeah. So I was gonna like hang it off of the bustle off of the pink channel.
Oh, off of the channel. So pardon me. If you're doing that, I think that I would either just leave it smooth,
Okay.
or I would do like the occasional like little pleat by hand as you were describing. I think that would work well. You could, if you want a sort of soft gather to it, you could use Cindy's suggestion method and basically run a little zigzag over a thread to gently gather that top edge, and then stitch it down with like a nice straight stitch once you're happy with the amount of gather you've got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm also going to put it at the bottom. It was such a good deal at Lace King that I got a lot.
Sometimes you need a lot of lace. Absolutely. Go with it.
They charge so much less if you get it in 14-yard lots.
Yes.
That was what I did.
Oh, then you got to do it.
Yeah, you can get like 3 yards or 14.
Get 14.
Yeah.
Like every time. Yeah.
So if you're interested, I have like 9 pairs of bloomers that just got made up that all have lace at the bottom edge in different varieties of, is it gathered, is it flat? Do you want to see?
Yeah,
Would
we'd
that
love
help
to
you?
see that.
I'll
Yeah,
go grab them.
When you get back, I'll spotlight you so we can all see. That'd be great. So, what I'm going to do is I am going to be lining up my middle seam of my ruffle with the middle seam of my bustle back, and I want right sides together. And so I'm just going to like lay it over the top. Now, with this, I can show you that this is kind of like the 1.5 to 1. So 1.5 inches for every inch of flat. And I end up with a little bit of extra hanging off the edge. If I don't want that, if I want a tighter gather, I'm going to want to do either Cindy's, like the method Cindy brought up with the zigzag over a pull cord so I can pull it nice and tight, or I'm going to want to do my double row of thread and pull it into position. But this is a very nice soft gather. I'm not unhappy with it. And I'm going to be honest, I will just keep this little ruffle to put on something else is what's going to happen. So I'm not even worried about it.
Okay,
Yes,
so that
all right.
ruffle is not adjustable, correct? That's what it sounds like?
Not once I've used this gathering thread or gathering foot. Now, what I could do, and then we're going to look at Cindy's examples, is I could still divide and conquer with this and like pin it in place, divide and conquer, and then pin and like sort of pleat the gathers to make it tighter. So I get like a little pleated gather situation if I'm like, no, I really want all of that fabric in there. But the gathering foot is not adjustable by pulling on the cords. At least mine isn't. Maybe some gathering foots work better that way. But once I have like stitched this in place, it is like, there you go. That's what you got. That is your gather. So the adjustability is less than many of the other methods. So that is something to keep in mind. All right, Cindy, you have some examples for us. Let me spotlight you so we can see these. Thank you.
So these are all crazy because they're my apocalypse bloomers.
Oh,
it's the apocalypse. You need bloomers.
yeah,
the fabric you have on hand. So this is what you're making your bloomers out of.
I'm excited.
So they're it's all pretty much cheap lace. So this is, and they are crazy. Okay. So this is 2 layers of pre-gathered nylon lace at the edge, and it's pretty cute.
That's cute.
It's on flannel butterflies. So
okay. Very nice.
So and this fabric's like mostly vintage. So this is like from the I don't know, 1980s, 1990s.
Oh my gosh. It's so weird that that's vintage, but it is. It
Yeah, it's
is.
vintage and it's 100% cotton.
Oh my
So
God.
uh unlike the lace. So this is 2 layers of wider lace and it's gathered. Let me see if I can find it. This one, uh, this is a linen blend. Okay, this one, we had this lace and
Flat.
this lace in the same pattern. So it's 2 pieces of flat lace and then a piece of gathered lace that hangs off the edge.
Oh,
Are
that's
those the
fun.
bloomers for the queen?
What?
Are those bloomers for the queen since they're so special?
Oh,
Yeah.
no, these are like more apocalypse bloomers. It just depended on which lace looked good with which fabric. So like this one has teal lace, and again, this is 3 rows of pre-gathered lace,
Oh, pretty.
and this is the same fabric with the black lace on it. This is not as successful. This is really pale blue lace that's very translucent and sewn flat.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
which sometimes the sewn flat looks good and sometimes. And again, with the, yeah, okay. And then this one, this lace is designed to have a ribbon put through it.
Oh, yeah.
But it was so perfect with the pink fabric, we just did it like this.
I
So
love
this is
that.
2 rows of flat lace that's really pretty and decorative. And this is kind of what I was going to do when I get the lace in the mail.
I like
And
that.
this one is 3 rows of flat lace, which I'm not doing a good job of showing you, but so because there's so much gather in the ruffle itself, it doesn't really matter that the lace is flat.
No, no, because it's the ruffle sort of like causes that flat lace to
Yeah, the
get.
ruffle makes the flat
Yeah.
lace not be flat.
Right.
So it works either way, I think. So this
Yeah.
is all flat, and this is all flat. And then the rest of them that I have today are
I love that.
flat and
Thank you.
gathered.
Thanks for bringing us some examples to look at some different options of how you can apply your gathers or not.
They're a little crazy, but yeah.
Yeah. So with your ruffle on the base of your um bustle petticoat here that we're creating, the main reason you want a little bit of volume and body and softness here is because you want to break up that rigid edge of the bone that's going there. But like I said, you could even pleat. So if you want to do something kind of more flat and smooth, you can get away with that as long as you remember you definitely need a petticoat over this, right? But the ruffle is doing the multi-duty of being a weight to pull your bustle cage down into position. It's pretty. We like something pretty. It's a little fur below. They were really into those. And it softens that sharp edge of the bone at the base of your bustle cage. But there are extant bustle cages that are very plain Jane, that don't have a lot of trim on them, that have a very like flat finish at the bottom of the lobster tail. So you've got a lot of options. Now, I am just pinning my gathers in place. And partly I'm doing that so I know where to start sewing and how much I'm going to cut off at the end. So I started from the middle and I lined up my seams. If you did 3 21-inch long pieces rather than doing 2 42-inch long pieces as I did, then you probably are not going to line this seam up with your center back seam. You want to space those seams sort of equidistant from each other along the bottom edge of your petticoat. But with your gathering foot, you can stoke your gathers a little bit. Not as much, again, as if you do the 2 rows of stitching, but you may want to go in and just like make sure you're happy with how they are along the edge. And all I do is I take a pin and I run it along my gathers to sort of like even them out nicely between where I've pinned it. I may or may not do this the whole length of the ruffle on a project. It depends on the project, but it will make for a nicer array of your ruffles. If you're like, boy, those ruffles are just really not quite tight enough, you can do. Did not put a pin in my mouth. We're going to pretend like we didn't see that. You can sort of like do a loose divide and conquer where you kind of give yourself a little hat here. And this is a very cheaty McCheaterson method and the least precise way to go. But then you just sort of like keep pinning it down until you kind of force that ease into the space you have, and it will kind of force your gathers to be tighter together if you want it to be a little tighter than what you got from your gathering foot. But there's a limit to how much you can do that with the gathering foot. So it's a way to use that and get a little bit more volume into the space. But mostly if I choose to use the gathering foot, I stick with it as it is, and I just pin it in place. If I'm really comfortable and confident with it, I'll just hold it in place and stitch too, because again, I'm cheeky and I will go without pins all the time that other people might choose to use pins. And some of it is like speed, some of it is that the pins kind of get in the way, some of it is the delicacy of the fabric, but often it's just frankly speed. So I am pinning, so I have right sides together. And this is immediately on the bottom edge of the back of my bustle cage. So she leaves enough space for you to add in this ruffle with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And there's like going to be a tiny amount of space under that bottom rung of your boning and the start of the ruffle, but there's not a lot of room there. So, and that's intentional because it has to do with the way the wings and the bum pad line up to create the tension that makes the sort of rounded shape of your bustle cage. And once I've got this all pinned in place, I'm just going to run a normal straight stitch. Now,
So, and she actually has you hem the sides and the bottom of the ruffle before you put it on, but you're putting it on with the raw edge on the side. Is that? Oh, you've
well,
got the hem at the bottom with the
I've
bottom.
got the head at the bottom. I think initially I thought I would just have my lovely selvage edge and I would leave that. But yeah, so what I'll probably do is leave enough fabric left over on the edge to go in and put the hem in. Just a narrow hem. Thank you for bringing that up, Cindy.
Yeah.
I wasn't even
I
thinking
just,
about it.
you've adjusted the way that you're putting it together to,
Yeah.
and
So
I wanted to know if that was an adjustment you were doing.
yeah, so it is kind of an adjustment. And then so you do want to have some sort of hem on the side if you're not using the selvage edge of your fabric. And basically what I'll do, just fold this over. I'm glad you asked because I was counting on that selvage edge, and then I was like, oh, we're not doing that now. So what I'll do is I'll cut a little bit past the edge here because the edge will get captured in the upper edge is going to get captured in the wing and the bum pad. And so I just want to leave enough left over here that I can fold in a little narrow hem here and just top stitch that in place along the edge or whip stitch it by hand.
So you don't have to step it back, the seam allowance width in order to keep it from getting caught in all the other layers? Or you just don't worry about that?
Oh, that's a great question. No, I think I don't worry about it normally. So that maybe that is like some slapdash sewing on my part. So let me do a little quick trim here.
But she gives very little directions. It's like, put the ruffle on. It's like,
Put the ruffle on. And I do. So we're just gonna trim. I'm trimming with about an inch overhang here. So what happens, and we're not going to get to that tonight, so I apologize, but we will get to that on Sunday. What happens is your wing and your bum pad actually attach right here at the base, right underneath the final rung of boning, and runs all the way along this side from top to bottom with the wing. And then the bum pad runs from right below the bone to right above the top bone because it is like holding those bones in shape. And Cindy's question, if I understand it, is, am I worried about the edge of this ruffle and hemming it and getting it caught in that seam allowance where the wings and the bum pad and all of that are getting stitched into place? And so typically, to be honest, I go in and just like fold in a little hem once I've got the ruffle in place, and I top stitch it or I hand whip stitch it depending on the fabric and what I'm using. And then I do take it in so that it's offset by about a ½ inch because I know that that ½ inch is going into the seam allowance. So does that answer your question, Cindy? Because it was a really good question. And it was something I was like, to be honest, I wasn't thinking about it because I'm like, it was a habitual thing I do without thought. And so I appreciate you slowing me down and asking me about it because it's an important question and it's important to think about how you're going to finish it. If you are dividing and conquering, if you're using the like zigzag over a cord and pulling, you may want to pre-hem the edge of your ruffle before you pin it in place so that you've already got that nice little hem and you don't have to do this kind of janky thing that I'm doing. But also you can do the janky thing I'm doing. It clearly has worked for me because I do it without thinking about it like a fool. So anyway, I hope that that kind of answered that question. I feel like it's not the most satisfying answer I've ever given, but it's an honest answer. So I do typically like to make a fairly narrow hem if I'm not using my selvage edge. And so I normally do about a quarter or a half inch folded over and folded over again. So I end up with this like nice little narrow hem on the, or like, yeah, on the side, like so. And if I'm gonna like do this before I attach my ruffle, then I go in and I machine stitch it, just like so after pressing it. So any questions? These have all been great questions. Okay, good. Cindy, thank you for keeping me honest and asking good questions.
You're welcome. Am I
Yeah.
excess for wanting to bind the seam after I put the ruffle on?
You're not excessive.
I
Listen,
am excessive. I'm
I
excessive.
mean, we're coming up on 7:40, so we're probably not going to like do the next steps. I'm going to talk about the binding and the next steps. So you end up with this like seam at the top of your ruffle and the bottom of your bustle cage. And I finished them with a lovely little serged edge, so they're not raw. You could zigzag stitch them. You could use pinking shears to finish those edges, but the seam allowance will be visible. And so Cindy is making a good point. Like, do you bind that edge? Do you cover up that raw edge? You absolutely could, with a little bit of bias tape, cover it up. No one will see your raw edges. It also has the advantage of really strengthening the join of where your ruffle is attached to the back of your bustle cage. So there's a bonus and an advantage to doing that. Typically, what I do is honestly, I press it up. And then once I'm happy with how it's attached, I go in and I just top stitch the edge. And that is how I reinforce it. But I leave those seam allowances visible rather than binding them. It's like a little bit less intensive to do that. But the binding is a nicer finish. It's more professional, it's cleaner, and you hide your raw edges, which is always nice. So both options are great. Yeah. You can do you can do it without the top stitching too. You can just like press it up and leave it out there in the world, and that's also fine. So, but if you want to bind your edge, if you want to join Cindy in the binding club, that's also a completely lovely way to do it, and it will make for a very nice professional finish. So, yeah.
Well, and you can just Google Hong Kong finish and it'll tell you how to do it.
Oh, good old Hong Kong finish. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So good. I do like the way that the bound edges and the Hong Kong finish look, and especially for something like this where it's super open and potentially people could see your selvages and your raw edges. I have a lot of seam allowance in this because I did all this piecing. And so I'm just living that life where I've serged all of my edges. They're not going to shred on me, but they are going to be visible. So I also serged them with rainbow threads because while I am like absolutely not going to bind them, I still made them a little bit attractive by making the thread I chose a little bit, multicolored and bright and vibrant, keeping up with the project. So if my raw edges are going to be visible from a garment, if it's just going to be a serged edge, I will often pick a thread that's like a contrast or somehow pretty with the inside of the garment. So at least it's like it looks nice, even though you can see those, seam edges. So, all right. All right. That was a good conversation, good questions. Cindy, thank you for bringing it up. And also for mentioning our Hong Kong finish. Any other questions before we wrap up tonight. I'm not going to get that ruffle sewn on. I hope that you guys kind of know that you're just going to run in with a straight stitch to attach that ruffle now that we've made it. On Sunday, we're going to attach our wings and our bum pad. So I'd say get ready for that. We probably won't get to the waistband, although who knows, maybe we'll have like a day with lots of progress and my feet will not decide to not work and give us a bunch of guff. But I think that we're going to just work on the wings and the bum pad, which is initially what I thought we were going to do today, but I had forgotten that you need to add your ruffle before you add your wings. And you can see why you need to do that because of Cindy Joy's question, like the side edge of your ruffle lines up with the wing and is sort of buried a little bit into the side seam of the bustle cage. So you need to have it in place first. Anyway, yeah. Any questions, Martha?
I have a question, of course.
Of course, thank you.
Unlike Cindy Joy, I did not calculate out how much bias tape I was going to need and may have gone a bit overboard.
I went
So
overboard. Well, I went underboard and then I went overboard. So yeah.
yeah. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have leftover. And I was reading on the instructions that it said on the wings that you're just supposed to fold it over and zigzag it. Is it
Yeah,
okay to use? I know it's not very fancy. Is it okay to like just put bias tape on that edge there?
absolutely. Absolutely. So my original plan for my wings, which I've probably not going to do now, was actually to do the same treatment along the edge of my wings as I did at the bottom of the ruffle at the back of at the bottom of the ruffle at the back here. I think because I'm using this beautiful cotton organdy that it might get a little bit too stiff and a little bit too hefty to do the full stripes, but I may change my mind before Sunday, so I'm not committed to anything. So it absolutely, you could bind this edge off with some bias tape and it would look beautiful and it would be a nice clean finish. And then you wouldn't have to do the thing where you're trying to fold over this curved edge and like you're going to need to snip it and press it and force this curve to be flat and then just zigzagging it. So, you know, you'll definitely see this little narrow hem at the front. That said, I have definitely finished my front edges by just folding it under and zigzagging or top stitching or I've on really fancy occasions when I was like, ooh, I really feel like hand stitching. I've also gone in and done like an invisible hand stitch here and just very carefully hemmed this into place so you cannot see the stitching, which is the fussiest approach. You could also, frankly, if you want to be real fancy, you can add lace here. You can add different kinds of trim here and just have fun with it because it's just an edge. So it's another nice place to add a little bit of trim. Oh yeah, there's some options. But you can see I just hand press that in place and it needs a good actual steam because it's a curve. And it probably needs some snipping to lie nice and flat. So you know, that's it's a simple finish, but binding it would be like a little fancier and you wouldn't have to do all that snipping and everything. So, yeah.
And you could do the binding and then put the lace right inside the binding on the front.
That also is true. And it would look so pretty, especially with the flat lace. And you could like just do a little pleat around the curve to make it work. It would be really nice. Or if you're doing some beaded lace like Cindy has, where you are it has the hole so you can run the ribbon through it. You could do something like that and run a ribbon through that. You could get really fancy on your wings too, and like really decorative up here. Um, so the thing about any of these underpinnings is that you can get as fancy with them as your fanciest lingerie, which means more lace, more furbelows, more ribbon, more everything if you want. You actually probably can't go overboard on your underpinnings. It's just all depends on how much effort you want to put into trimming it out. But if you're like, you know what, I've always wanted to have like my French boudoir lingerie moment with my bustle cage, you could totally go for that, right? So,
I saw this like Vogue video or something. So I'm not saying it was historically accurate, but they
oh,
were saying, why does all lingerie have little bow? Almost all lingerie has little bows on the front, right? So if this is going to be real lingerie, like the bustle is going to be lingerie, we have to put a bow on it, right?
yeah, you could put a bow
That's
at the
on,
front.
mostly on bras, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Bras.
usually in the center of your bra.
Yeah.
It's where the busk used to like, they'd slip in a busk into the front of their pair of bodies and then tie it with a little bow. And we've ended up with this weird artifact into modern brassieres. Like I just reached into my top and I was like, yeah, this one's got a bow on it. All of my bras have a little bow on them.
Yeah.
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 You
But you
put
could
little
totally
bows
do
all
that.
along the edge of the wings.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, heckin' cute. Or to like do that sort of ribbon trim where you make your own little like
Oh,
bows. I don't know.
passementerie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
Where you
I'm like,
box pleat it and then pull it down in the middle.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like I'm like, oh, I'm doing that on a project. And so
He
I'm
has
like,
an example.
I actually have an example. So you could totally do something like that all along the edge of your vessel cage. You could get really outrageous and have a great time with it. It's it's for you. It can be a place of like really decorative sewing because you want it, or it can be very like I would not call mine plain Jane because I did all of this piecing and color blocking and everything, but I'm not doing a lot of really frilly trim with it. I'm keeping it kind of very tailored
Smooth.
looking. Yeah, smooth. In part because there's so much color happening. Like I laid the purple lace onto it, and that was originally what I was planning to do with the ruffle. And I was like, ooh, actually, this looks ridiculous. The purple lace does not fit because everything is very streamlined, very color blocked, very smooth. And then this lace is just sort of like out of left field. So it can vary by project too. Clearly, I like fussy things and I like fussy trim. I'm willing to do very elaborate trim on things, but sometimes I opt into letting the color or the way I've pieced things be the sort of decorative element. And in the case of my bustle cage, I'm also doing a lot of this wild top stitching, which is very decorative if you get up close enough to it. I don't know how much it reads on the camera. So, yeah, that's a long-winded way to say definitely you should add more lace. You should go wild with this if you want. But if you're like, man, I just want to get through it and actually have one done, I don't want to be that wild with my decoration. Also legit. Yeah. So whatever the spirit moves you to. I hope that you will have such a fun time making your own lobster tail bustle cage that you will make more in the future and that you'll have one for every whim because they're a fairly quick project overall once you have the sense of them. And Joanne, thank you for inspiring us to look at the different feet tonight and to have our adventure with the ruffler foot. I'm sad that the ruffler was like, fie on you. I'm going to like show all the
Persnickety.
ways that I am difficult. It was very persnickety tonight. But that said, as much as it was thwarting me, honestly, the ruffling foot can do a beautiful job. It can be great. I encourage you to give it a try and to practice with it. I know a number of folks who swear by using theirs, but if you are not willing to just sort of like wing it, which clearly I'm willing to wing it, especially live during class. I'm like, oh, sure, we'll just give it a try and whatever happens, happens. But if you want to make sure that you're cutting exactly the right amount, you're not wasting fabric, you're not wasting your time, and that you are gathering it as much as you want it to, I recommend testing on some scraps of fabric. The only scraps I had were like, twill offcuts from other projects. So I was like, let's see how this twill does. And the machine was like, no. But
I think
I
it was
do.
more like, bitch, no.
It was more like, bitch, no, to be honest. That's correct. It definitely was like, listen, Hussy, I am tired. What are you wanting me to do? You know, I love spending this time with all of you, and getting to do it twice a week is really fun for me. I hope that you are also having a good time. Um, I'm looking forward to more and more projects with all of you. I realize we're doing a lot of femme-centric projects because I do a lot of clothes for female people. But I am thinking about some things we could do in the future that are like, how do I put this? I don't look at skirts and go, that's only for women. But a lot of people are, especially like masculine people, are like, I don't really want to wear a bustle skirt. And I'm like, but you could, because everybody can. And everybody can to learn to make skirts. It's not a gendered experience. But
Yeah.
I do. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say corsets go all ways, and you did a corset class.
Yes,
But it seems like if
exactly.
you're gonna do something that could fit everybody, or
Yes.
be styled by anybody, maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Cloaks, you know?
There's a
Cloaks.
lot of guys that like
Oh my
wearing
gosh.
corsets.
Honestly,
Really is.
maybe we will do a cape or a cloak later on, depending on how the corset class goes in the autumn. Maybe we'll come back and do a little cape or a cloak afterwards for our winter project. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
So I think the little cape or a cloak is a great idea. I make a lot of capes for Glenn, and I've done the like little shoulder cape for me, and I've done the American Duchess cape that crosses over. So think about the kind of cape or cloak you might like as a project at the end of the year. I might throw some pattern options out there. I think all of them work for like all people and all bodies. I really love the American Duchess crossover cape, and I'd love to make it again, but I have to tell you, if you are very buxom, if you have large tracts of land, it is a little tricky to fit that one because it is made for sort of like a B to D cup. And when you get into a K or L cup, it's sort of like, I don't know what to do with you. I'm like, I don't know what to do with me either, it turns out. So
Uh,
keep that in mind.
I have
Yeah.
not investigated this, but
Oh,
Bernadette Banner made a cloak, the kind
oh,
that you can stick your hands out of.
oh yeah.
Oh,
Nice,
the one
nice.
with the sleeves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
like
what
that one.
I want. I have
That would be
I
great in plaid.
That would be
I
great and
made
fun.
myself a TOS scant.
Ooh,
It is so cold because it's a mini skirt and it's got this low neckline. So
yeah.
I'm going, well, I need outerwear for it. And
Yeah.
except in the second pilot, they had no outerwear.
No.
And so I was thinking 60s, 60s, 60s. Cloak,
The
a
cloak.
cape. out of, and I have plenty of the command gold double dip. I'm command gold because I'm navigator.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, cape would be really nice.
Honestly, Joanne, I don't know if I can find it off the like top of my head. But there's this great pattern from Vogue that I've used a number of times for Glenn in particular, but it is a ladies pattern. So it is drafted originally for a bosom. If you've got it, it's got space for it. And it kind of
No, I'm
like,
sorry, I've never had much of a bosom.
well, neither does Glenn. So you can also make it work for somebody who
Okay.
doesn't have much of a bosom. But it has this wonderful like inset, you know, bit for the part that is over your arm, and it can have these little like slots where you can put your hands through in it, and it's got this very 60s mod look to it. It was very easy to make, and I was super happy with how it came out. So I'll try and find the pattern number for you because it has that vibe. But
thank you. I would love that because I just freeze in that.
Yeah.
Just it's just so cold. Jake has an Enterprise jacket, and so I wore that over it, saying that my great grandmother gave it to me because she served on the original Enterprise, at X-01. That was my story.
I love that. That's great. Oh, good old Star Trek. Man,
Yeah.
I'm still very, very happy with my Star Trek uniform I made for us
It
this
is
year.
great. So
Yeah.
little side going off the road again.
Yeah.
The Met Gala theme for next year is space.
Oh.
Ooh.
Ooh.
I'm wondering
Ooh.
if they'll get all science. They're doing like their emphasis, of course, is historical
Yeah.
space travel. But I'm wondering, but I bet that there'll be some science fiction stuff on the runway.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I'd love to see a homage to Barbarella, for instance. Oh, and Andy so kindly and Martha sharing the patterns. Thank you.
The same one. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Now,
I love a good cape.
Yeah, I thought that was a good. Yeah, I like
That's
the style of that one.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I love a cape. I think a cape's a fun thing to do in the winter anyway. And even though we'll be doing it just in time for it to start being too warm to wear it, if you live here, it'll be a fun project to make. I'll see if I can find something that's not going to take us like months to make, but will be more of like we can get it done in a reasonable number of weeks. For my dear friends who go to TeslaCon, the class will not happen on TeslaCon weekend. So Andy, that might be the one that's Glenn's. Thank you. That might be it. I can't open the link up and check right now, but
yeah,
that
I'll have to look later too.
yeah, but that looks like it might be the one. So but I think the cape cloak idea is such a great idea. So thank you for suggesting it, Martha, because now I'm gonna run with it. And I'm about it. So
Yeah, because that one's also got, room for arms.
yeah.
Yeah, the Bernadette Banner one, she attaches it with a belt in the front, but you don't have to put a belt on it. So
Yeah, but the belt's cute. It's a cute look. And the belt has a very like mod vibe to it as well. So that's nice. Bernadette, I think, normally has very solid construction on her things. So that's nice. The American Duchess pattern is free pattern that you can download from their website. It comes on like it's basically on a graph and then you like plot it out on your paper instead of like being something you print out and tape together. But maybe you could like have it printed full size because that would be really nice. Having plotted it out on paper, I was like, well, that is very tedious. But
Yeah, and I
yes,
do have a PDF.
yes, Andy just shared the direct link to that in the comments. Thank you. Andy's
Andy,
like
you're
on
too
it with
fast.
the
I got
links.
it too.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks guys for getting those links. So anyway, it's a great pattern. It's really cute. My favorite part of it is like I love the collar shape. Um, but the crossover looks really great on that one. It's just that personally, I actually need to redraft those front pieces to be a lot wider so that they appropriately cross over my bosom rather than looking like something Barbarella would have worn because they sort of like go down the center of my breast and they should sort of like cup the breast or like mostly cover the breast. And the way it crosses over, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, you know,
It's
Lauren is
not.
more like a B cup.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm a K cup, you all. So that's a long way from a B cup. Um,
Well, there's
yeah.
a woman that I watch. Her name is Nicole. She's Costuming Drama is the name of her website. I don't think
Yes.
she's super busty. I think she might be like a C.
Mhm.
And she was having problems. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the way it's constructed, it's just narrow enough that if you are buxom, it is not going to lay nicely and it's gonna sort of
yeah,
cross over in a weird way is the one like critique
yeah,
I have.
yeah,
And I haven't resolved that problem, but
yeah,
I like the shape of it otherwise.
yeah.
And I did wear mine to TeslaCon in 2021, I think. Yeah, I think that's when I was there last. It was like a little wool check number. Yeah. So nice and warm. It really did help being up there in the cold climate. And then you guys had like an unseasonably warm winter. And I actually got too warm by the end of the weekend. So
I was
anyway,
gonna say, but coming from Tucson, you still thought it was cold.
I did. Oh my gosh. I bought a coat for that and everything. So, my darlings, this was great. Thank you for the posts, like sewing conversation about future projects and patterns and things. We will continue with our bustle adventures on Sunday. So, if you are keeping up, get that ruffle in place. If you're like happy to be here and sewing at your own speed, which is what I would be doing, then next time I'm going to go over the wings and the tush pad, and hopefully we will get everything set up for putting in our waistband, which will be the last big thing, and then we'll slide in those bones, whip stitch, Bob's your uncle. It's like it starts to pick up momentum really fast. So, but yeah, I'm excited. All right, my
Uh,
darlings.
I didn't mean to get behind. It just happened.
Oh,
But the
Yeah,
cat on my lap is
that,
now gone.
that happens.
yeah, it happens. Also,
Oh,
honestly, my darlings, I was not where I wanted to be for tonight's class. I don't feel my best, and you guys have been very patient, and I appreciated it so much. But I had the wrong order of operations, and it threw me off my stride entirely. So we all have those moments. It's a human experience, and we have day jobs, family commitments, pets, just feeling like today is not a day I want to do anything. I want to hide in my pillow fort. All like completely viable and valid reasons for why you might not be sewing constantly. Keep in mind that I can go faster too, because I know this pattern and I have made it a million times. But I hope that this is helping you feel like the bustle cage is not that arcane and that you can make your own. And I am so delighted to see all of you embracing your own flamboyance with your bustle. That makes me so happy beyond words. So anyway, I will see you on Sunday twice because we have class in the morning and book club in the afternoon, because I am a wild woman. And then we will also have our Friday tea. And hopefully we will be able to wrap up in this coming week. So we'll have Sunday and Wednesday. I'd like to be done with showing you how to make the whole bustle cage before I go to Louisville. So that is my goal, is to get through the construction before I leave the state to be in Louisville. So you're not waiting on me to come back in June to finish up the project. So yeah.
Well, if we do the wings and the derriere blocking pad thing,
Yeah.
all we have left are putting in the bones in the waistband, right?
That's right. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And really, the waistband is a waistband. It's not hard in that it's a waistband, but there's like a little bit of trickiness because of the shape of the bustle at that point. And so what I find is just like getting everything through the foot, then getting it all lined up with this like kind of wild shape that's happening can sometimes be like a little intimidating, but it's a waistband. It's, other than the shape of this structure we've created, there are no surprises about this waistband. So just to put you at ease. Anyway, this was great tonight. Thank you so much. I know I can't keep you forever, and I would if I could, because I actively enjoy spending time with you. So thank you for spending your evening with me, staying up late. Martha,
Yeah, the
so
sun's going down.
yeah, right. I'm like, gotten really dark
It's getting
at
darker and darker
Cindy's.
here.
My house is now dark outside and the storm has passed, so that's nice because it was very noisy earlier. Um, but this was great, and I'll see you guys this weekend. All right, take care of yourselves, okay?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.